welcome to May 1st, Slator Pod. Hi, Esther.
Hey, Florian, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm actually here at the office. It might not be as quiet or recording quality as some of the other podcasts we've done, but hopefully nobody's going to walk in or drive past. So today's May 1st. That's actually a day off here in Switzerland. I don't think in the UK, right?
Not today, no.
No,
next week.
Next week, that's right. Yeah, and usually there's quite some demonstrations here on May 1st, right? But they're clamping down on this. There's going to be 0 people on the streets, so it's going to be.
I thought you guys were coming out. Aren't you coming out of lockdown though at some point?
Yeah, we've come out of it in a sense.
Okay.
So they open up certain stores and like hairdressers and then next week they're going to open up most of the stores, I think, and the schools. Let's see where it goes. I just read before that Germany is second guessing their decision to open up schools because of some Danish data. So who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, we're kind of in this in between land where it's semi closed still. Great, but well, it's a big week for us and for you as well, because we published our flagship market report. So that's a 54-page monster of a report that has pretty much everything in there. Congratulations to you. You did a lot of the heavy lifting and writing on this.
Thank you. Yeah.
So very excited about that. We just hit publish about 2 hours ago, 1 hour ago, shared it on social media. So we're going to look at some of the things that we covered in there, but yeah, since it's 55 pages, we don't want to make this a Joe Rogan like 4.5 hour podcast, and so we're gonna just touch on some of the key points there. Also, I mentioned it briefly last week that we're doing a webinar for those that are purchasing the report and for our strategy package subscribers. So that's scheduled for May 14th now. It's fixed. We have announced it on the website as well. People can register there. So it's going to be on a Thursday. We needed a bit more time to set this up. I think last week I said May 7th, but it's going to be May 14th. That's great. We're going to have Bruna Bitter from MemoQ also joining us, and Phil Shaw from Transperfect. So nice. It's going to be a short and concise 1 hour, just run through how things stand, and we're going to give a bit of an update on how we see things also from that market report perspective. Well, what's on the agenda today? Again, first we're going to run through the report. We're going to talk about terminology management at Facebook, talk about terminology management at scale. That's probably as big a scale as you're going to get. You will take us through that European Union survey or European language industry survey that we covered. Yeah. Thousands of responses they gathered. Then just briefly, Straker published their results. Again, a proxy for maybe how some of the other LSPs are doing, and because they're publicly listed, they have to be very transparent. Then we're going to look briefly at AB5, that California regulation, and I'll just share some information about life sciences. We covered the clinical side of translation over the past few weeks, and I've been speaking to some people and have a bit more to say about that. So, in terms of the reports, Esther, what are some of the main chapters and things that we looked at there?
Sure. I mean, so we've covered obviously broad-reaching sort of verticals that we obviously defined in last year's report. So we had these 10 primary end customer verticals that we really feel capture most of the translation demand that exists.
What's a vertical?
Out there. What's a vertical? Well, good question. I mean, I guess in sort of language industry terms, it's something that you would classify as corresponding to a client industry or sector.
So finance.
Finance, life sciences, media, gaming. So it's all the ones that you will have heard us kind of talk about in some detail on the website and also in the podcast. So we have these 10 end client verticals, really, that we use that lens to look at and examine the language industry. So we've sized all of those verticals. We've also we updated that market size per vertical from last year's estimate. And we've also done a coronavirus impact assessment, obviously kind of based. This is a very unusual situation. We wouldn't normally kind of put out speculative figures for the year, but I mean, really we needed to provide some kind of update on coronavirus, given that it's going to have some kind of impact on the market size from 2019.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, the timing was, I mean, you can't say fortunate, but in a sense that if we had published this in February, then a lot of these figures would probably not be accurate. So we did try to update our estimates as much as possible given the current disruption, and also add some additional information at the end of the report. So we got the verticals, the competitive landscape on the services side. I think we added some good information in there. What was that, like core and adjacent services that should probably help people look at new areas for growth? Yeah,
exactly. So I think we've got a list of over sort of 200 services or something that we scoured the websites and other information of LSPs that they claim to be offering these services, and we've categorized them into core, so things which are directly related to translation management, technology and interpreting, and then adjacent, which would relate to maybe business relevant services that companies are also offering. So I don't know, e-discovery for one thing, within legal, or a number of different sort of service or vertical adjacent things like game development in gaming, for example. So these things are services that LSPs offer, but they're not necessarily specific to a language service provider.
Yeah, no, I think this is great because, currently also in the current situation, I think a lot of people are looking for, well, my business is under pressure at the moment. Maybe there's some other areas I want to consider going into, and this is definitely going to be very helpful. I mean, there's it's very compact, and you see what some of your competitors are offering that is kind of outside the traditional translation editing space. And LSPs are very much set up for again, remote work and managing lots of people and lots of payments. So there's all these other areas that they can potentially get into. Then we also looked at the technology landscape. We went through TMS, kind of framed it there from like pure play TMS to LSPs that have their own proprietary systems. So we looked at that. Then connectors and machine translation integration, and then machine translation. That was it's quite a sizable chapter. I think it's about 7 or 8 pages, right? We looked at what did we look at there? So pure play, MT. Sorry, go.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've sized the market again for machine translation for 2019, and looked at some of the ways that machine translation adoption is kind of ramping up. We have also integrated some of the survey questions. So we did a survey of 50 LSPs, and there were some quite interesting insights there in terms of how far along some companies are in their own integration and implementation of machine translation, as well as integrating, or I should say, including in the report some of the findings from the survey around people's sentiment towards machine translation. So is this the biggest threat to the language industry, for example, LSPs, in the coming decade? So we've kind of looked at some of those aspects, and potential impact on kind of pricing, unit pricing.
Good. Okay.
And then, beyond that, so that was sort of the kind of impact LSP business side. We've looked at the ecosystem as well. And we took some data and information there from Model Front, which did a very comprehensive overview of some of the machine translation pure play providers, and really looked at some of the main areas of machine translation research that are happening at the moment, tried to kind of collate that and compile it into something which LSPs and other professionals should be aware of, really, from a kind of commercial perspective, because as we know, a lot of this research eventually trickles down, or the most meaningful research will eventually trickle down into some form of adoption in the language industry. Yeah,
let's see. Right now, I'm kind of overwhelmed. Like, in our daily editorial, like there's 20 papers now on so many such arcane, empty topics. We did feature a couple with, I think we had the Apple paper, we had Cambridge, we had a couple other things, but it's getting so arcane. Anyway, from research and then in report, we also have M&A and funding. We don't have to go into that. That's just tracking all those M&A transactions, etc. That's going to be very helpful for anybody who wants to look at this space, the M&A space. And then finally, we spoke about the coronavirus impact. All right, so encourage everybody to go to the website and get the report, buy the report. It's it's month worth of work. It's a lot of data and useful things you can do to push your sales, push your marketing, push your strategy, and make sense of this. Very nicely layouted as well. I think it took a while to get the layout right. I think it's very well done. So hope everybody enjoys it. Moving to Facebook and terminology. Terminology is always this kind of always takes a bit of a backseat, I think, but it's super crucial. Super crucial because you get, if terms are inconsistent, then even a good translation may not be a great translation. So we looked at probably one of the most sophisticated terminology efforts out there at Facebook, and we were very lucky to have a gentleman called Uwe Mügge help us with this. He's the head of terminology at the Facebook unit, the business marketing unit. So, and he's also a prolific tweeter. He's very, very active on Twitter, right? So,
Twitter sphere. Yes.
Twitter sphere.
Or so, Twitterverse.
Twitterverse. On the Twitter. So yeah, just summarize that a little bit for us. Of course, everybody should read the article, but what was it about, and what makes this effort so sophisticated?
Yeah, I think consistency really is kind of the name of the game, and that really was what Uwe was telling us is kind of driving this initiative at Facebook. So consistency of terms, yes, but then also, I mean, this terminology unit is not only looking at consistency at the terminology level, but also things like spelling, capitalization, styling. So some of the things which are actually really nitty gritty and finer details of content presentation. So yeah, Uwe was hired, I think, in last year, May 2019, and since then has obviously been ramping up on this effort to roll out the dictionary for marketing terms for Facebook Global Business Marketing team. So I think that the product teams had already developed quite a sophisticated process for dealing with their terminology management. So this is something that was already established in the business, and presumably the marketing team now is taking on some of those learnings as well. So on product terminology on the product side had been standardized for years. So they were looking at things like localizability, entry development. They then published their dictionaries online and translated the terms. But marketing didn't have access to that same program, and so they've obviously gone about sort of creating this themselves. And the challenge really is that, as you can imagine, in Facebook they've got hundreds of content writers, so consistency is a huge challenge, and because there's such a large body of content for marketing, the translation tasks are split across multiple translators. Obviously you're using multiple resources for the translations. So, I mean, these translators are having to take decisions sometimes about campaign names, about event names and things like that, where, maybe you would want to tackle that in a consistent way. So that's really the aim of this dictionary initiative. And they really need to be structured about it.
One thing that I loved was when he said that they're actually going in even at when the term is being coined, they're looking at its localizability. Very interesting. So basically, I mean, there's a lot of these, probably in a network like Facebook, there's some new terms being coined as the business progresses, right? And then
you think like Facebook Watch or something like that.
Yeah, things like that. Things they're developing. So they're going in at the very early stage when the term's being coined and see, hey, does that actually work across the network? And in Facebook's case, I mean, the vast majority of their user base is non-English speaking. So it's not like, this is probably different from many other companies where they do have like a number one language. So in Facebook's case, yes, you do want to be there at the very source of when these terms are being coined. All right, sorry, go on.
No, yeah, absolutely. They made good progress so far. They've got a baseline dictionary already that's been translated into, I think, the 33 languages. And they're now focusing on integrating that dictionary into the tooling so they can roll that out across, make it available online.
Okay.
And they have a tool which provides automatic feedback, which I thought was quite sophisticated, as we've been saying. So suggestions for maybe ways to improve the terms or the definitions of the terms or potentially problematic entries. And one of the ways that I think obviously data-driven company, as Facebook is, they used in order to start creating the dictionary, they used sort of analytics data from the marketing pages that were the most frequently visited in the 6 months prior to starting. So they were looking at they wanted obviously for the terms to be most relevant. You don't want to, there's no point in including obsolete terms or what have you, and you want only the most relevant. And interestingly, I mean, they said it was as you'd expect, a cross-functional effort across lots of different teams. They have this sort of quite kind of senior review board that actually reviews every single entry that goes into it. And not only that, but they seem to have built this using really only internal resources. They're not relying on any kind of external suppliers at all.
No, they have enough resources over at Facebook, don't they?
There's a lot of people, yeah.
There's a lot of people. There's a lot of money. So
a lot of people, a lot of money. Yeah,
they're not
combination.
They're not lacking the resources. I'm sure.
No.
But some others are lacking resources right now. So that brings us to the language industry survey, the European language industry survey. So
it's a nice little segue.
Yeah, here's a segue for you from Facebook to small European LSPs. We were. This is a survey that was conducted by the EU ATC partnership with the LIA, FIT, Gala. We had a quick heads up on the results in the last podcast, but now we covered it more in depth. So we were in touch with Heike Leinhäuser, who's the president of EU ATC, and Annette Schiller, chairperson FIT Europe. And so tell us a bit more about the survey, who participated, and some of the key results just briefly. And people should obviously go and read the final report, but it's I think it's very telling about what's going on right now in the European LSP world.
For sure, yeah. Just to pick out a few, I suppose, of the takeaways here. But first to say, the survey was conducted in 45 countries. They had respondents from 45 countries. They had over they conducted the survey in 2 tranches before COVID hit and after it hit. So they had 800, the first participants in the first tranche, and then about 1,600 LSPs and freelancers in the second tranche. So just, to pick out some interesting things here. Some of the observations: small companies appear to be the hardest hit. Perhaps no surprise there. They're more vulnerable financially, as we know. However, only 12% of companies have said that they're intending to lay off staff, in light of coronavirus pandemic. LSPs now, on the LSP side, they're following, for the most part, government-imposed measures only. So things like social distancing, which obviously has the remote working impact, but they haven't really started other potential measures in the vast majority, like cost controls. So they're really focusing on just following guidelines. Haven't really started in any real way cost control. However, it is on the radar for the majority of LSPs who took the survey. But really, their main focus of LSPs coming out of COVID is going to be driving sales, driving revenue to regain lost ground.
Yeah, that's also one of the reasons why we, while we were drafting the report, we did add a fair amount of additional information for lead generation, marketing, sales enablement. That's different, maybe a little bit different from, not different, but in addition to the 2019 report, where it was kind of more macro and analytical. And right now there's a lot of actionable stuff in there, because we understand that people have to go out and sell, people have to do marketing now, people have to find different avenues for to make sure that they can hold a certain revenue level. So and then just two extra points really on the freelancer side. The survey found that the overwhelming majority of freelancers were only 1 to 3 months runway, or had only 1 to 3 months runway on their finances without any additional support. Then
it's short, I mean, and then building on that, they were talking about kind of governmental provisions for freelancers and specifically translators and interpreters. In this article, I mean, we've covered that generally the governmental provisions like financial support for freelancers is kind of lacking across countries. However, there have been some successful lobbying efforts, which I thought was interesting. Lobbying efforts are ongoing in different countries to try and help freelancers and freelance translators. But Greece, interestingly, does have a model that is specifically providing for translators and interpreters. And actually, Italy then adopted something quite similar, having, first of all, not had any real provision for translators and interpreters. So that was the result of some lobbying efforts by an industry association in Italy as well.
Yeah, I think it's the problem is that if you're an independent professional, you're kind of in no man's land in terms of your legal setup in some countries. Like you're not you're not a corporation, right? You're not a PTE or a PLC, and you're also not employed, right? So you kind of fall by the wayside, and it's in certain countries, Switzerland included, like it's also hard for the government to understand how much income you've actually generated. Sometimes, I mean, there's special conditions. So it is good to see that some countries at least are providing support. But I think that will be. It's not easy. I mean, all of these officials are probably overwhelmed right now with so much work. Well, that segues into another story we have, similar, AB5 in California, also by freelancers, freelance professionals, translators, and interpreters, and they get a 1-2 punch because we've been speaking about this AB5 provision, which was originally intended to be to protect, quote unquote, the gig workers, right? The Uber and Lyft and all these drivers, and make sure that they get actually employed by these companies. And then in this legislation, it also swept up were the translators and interpreters. So they had to prove that they're an independent contractor with this kind of obscure test. And if not, they will basically be treated as an employee of the company. So even if you only do a couple of translations for a corporation in California for, like once a month or something, they'd still technically, you'd qualify to be their employee, which in practice, in reality, it doesn't work. And this led to a lot of companies pulling back from using California-based freelancers, right?
Yeah, understandably.
This is real. So I mean, they pulled back. I mean, we've seen some emails from some of the big LSPs that they said, look, we can't work with you anymore as long as this isn't sorted out. So now with COVID coming in, it's a 1-2 punch. They already were struggling to keep their businesses going, and now in this new kind of remote virtual world, I mean, they're getting hit again. So there's some very faint. Well, let me just quote somebody, a federal court interpreter, Esther Hermida. She told us that COVID-19 and AB5 have been a lethal combination for our profession. We are holding our collective breath to see if we can resume our professional lives after this devastating 1-2 punch. Now, there is a bit of light at the end, a tiny, faint light at the end of the tunnel, because there's a Senate bill coming in called Senate Bill 900. Apparently, there's some positive aspects. ATA is saying, the American Translators Association is saying that they now could be classified as translator interpreters, that is, could be classified as independent contractors without having to apply that ABC test. And it expressly includes sole proprietors as permissible business entity for a service provider. So looks like there might be some change that at least alleviates that AB5 component. Of course, coronavirus is still going to be there, but there's some light at the tunnel there, because frankly, I don't see if this AB5 would get through in the current form and just stay. I mean, basically would mean that most of California's freelancers would have to move out of the state, or I don't know. I'm not a legal expert, but it seems very disruptive. And on the small company side, moving out of California, moving to New Zealand, again, we're tracking these results, announcements by some of the few listed language service providers, and one of them was Straker Translations. They provided an update to the market. And it can be a bit of a proxy, whereas for some of the SME agencies as a whole, so Straker had a flat year, or maybe slight growth there in 2020, or in their financial year 2020. But they did also say similar choice of words like SDL, that they saw early signs of slower decision making in certain business segments from mid-March onwards. They said that some enterprise customers have been hit, and they deferred product launches, and general commercial activity reduced. They also said they're quote unquote right-sized the company footprint in Europe. That's probably corporate speak for layoffs, and that they're saving a couple of $1 million on that. And also, because we cover at Slator, we cover those transactions, M&A, merchants acquisitions a lot. They said they paused their acquisition strategy, and they pulled out or put on hold one of the deals that they were working on, pushed it towards the end of the year. But also the CEO said that they're looking for quote unquote well-priced M&A transactions post-coronavirus. So there's probably some people with cash on the balance sheet hoping that they can come back and pick up a few competitors that were weakened by the crisis. So taking some, trying to make the best of that. So on the M&A side, Straker's a bit special because they are a publicly listed company. They IPO, they have a lot of cash on the balance sheet, so that's very different from your typical SME LSP. But on the business side, I would say what they're saying here is probably fairly indicative of many others as well, that there's a fair slowdown. All right, to close, just a brief update on life sciences. We spoke about it twice over the past 8 weeks or so on Slater Pod. And initially we were kind of fairly bullish on life sciences, right? You'd think, well, people need medication all the time. You look at the stock price of the big pharmaceutical company. But apparently that's not so. I've spoken to some people from not from the language industry side, but like from the CRO side. Those are these those are large companies that are doing outsourced services for big pharmaceutical companies, and they're saying that the clinical trial side is hard hit because you can't get access to the study sites. So a lot of these clinical trials are on hold for now, and then patients are actually reluctant to sign up for trials in the first place, because right now, if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, would you like to participate in a clinical trial?" Not sure you'd say yes. It's probably the worst time to sign up patients.
Maybe a coronavirus clinical trial.
Yeah, maybe a coronavirus. Yeah, exactly. But other than that, it's very hard. It's just pretty big disruptions in that entire clinical trial space. That said, though, many would expect that it will bounce back in the second half of the year when some of these lockdown measures are eased up, and then there's kind of a lot of pent up. Demand. But for now, I would expect a fair amount of weakness among also the life sciences LSPs, which typically you would expect are would be stable in a quote-unquote normal recession, right? But this one is disruptive to that as well.
We haven't seen that yet, though, have we? I mean, in terms of sort of financial results for
too
LSPs
early.
That we've covered so far, it hasn't hit.
It's too early.
In the sense that, obviously travel and retail is an immediate hit, tourism also immediate hit. But this hasn't really trickled down.
I think it's quite early. It was early, so it was only the last 2 weeks of March when you had these in Europe, at least in the United States. I think in Q2 you're definitely going to see it. So now the question really is how much of that pent up demand is going to be released in the second half once the lockdown measures hopefully ease up. All right, so that was it for today. Thanks so much for listening, and again, I encourage you to head over to our website and have a look at the report, download it. It's we're very proud and very excited to release it today. So thanks a lot to you, Esther.
Thanks, Florian.
All right, take care. Bye.
See ya. Bye.